easy, but I want to try to do it. Oh, over here, plug the bar.
Oh, forget about
Baruchim Aboyim B'Shem Irgin Shirtar. We'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir. We'd like to give a big yashikar to our Barry Parnas for sponsoring today's shir. Lili Nishmas, the unforgettable, Rabbi Avram Wilson, Rabbi Avram Nachman, Rabbi Zev Haloshon, Tenishmos through Rabbi Tzor Chaim. Now I have the cover there of today's shir from Rabbi Yakov Zev Smith, Shlita on Shmiras Haloshon Dilemmas. Rav Smith.
Someone was looking into a certain shidduch about a girl that was, there was a broken engagement previously, and he told me he has no way to find that information about this girl unless he asks the ex-chassan. He knows it's not the lachatchila, but is there a heta, is it right? And this question, another question that I consider Shmiras Haloshon dilemmas is the subject of today, because in the past we spoke about the sugya of Lashon Hara L'Tayeles, that was tape 799, and again it was 1029. And basically, really, there's no heta to talk Lashon Hara. A person has to be willing to give up all his money, not to be even any lav, as the Ramah says, Beferish and Kuf Nun Zayin Sif Aleph. So how could you even think that Lashon Hara for a benefit is mutter? Lashon Hara is much worse than 1 lav, it's 17 lav and 14 esin. But as we explained previously, the Ikka Issa of Lashon Hara, as the Rambam calls it, is Dibur Hamazik. When someone does something that's damaging, says something that's hurtful or destructive, that's the Issa of Lashon Hara. And the Chavetz Chaim in Klal Yud, Siv Beis, and in Rechilas Klal Tes, Siv Beis explains, but if you do say Lashon Hara to save someone from a problem, if you do something to prevent Agmas Nefesh, that's not Lashon Hara. We call it Lashon Hara Te'eles. In reality, it's not Lashon Hara. As the Paiskim explained, there's an Issa of Leiseilech Rachel Ba'mecha, you're not allowed to say Lashon Hara. But the very same pasuk says Leisamayr al Dam Riyecha. You can't watch by as a friend of you or someone is losing money or losing his life. So basically, the term Lashon Hara Te'eles is inaccurate, because when there's a Te'eles, when there's a heta, it's not Lashon Hara. It's the Chiyuv of Leisamayr al Dam Riyecha. So that's a very brief introduction to the sugya, and a person is walking a tightrope. Either it's the Chiyuv of the Issa of Leiseilech Rachel Ba'mecha, or it's the Chiyuv of saying information Leisamayr al Dam Riyecha. Now, again, in the past, that was 1029, we reduced what the Chavetz Chaim says, the preconditions, what has to be met before one says Lashon Hara Te'eles. So we try to put it into the word emes. So to make a long story short, the first precondition before one says Lashon Hara Te'eles, make sure what you're saying is truth. Not hearsay, not rumors. A person sees something, but is that really what the truth is? And I remember a story when it happens, I want to share it with you. Many years ago, there was a rumor going around that Rav Moshe did not drink a certain milk. Now, in earlier times, there weren't so many milks, and it was a chiddush. If he didn't like the milk, he should have said something. But people saw that he didn't drink the milk. What was the story? So you have to remember, this goes back years ago, before they had these plastic containers. They had milk were in cartons. So Rav Moshe was by Yibris, he picked up a carton of milk, and he put it down. He took a different milk from a different hechsha. Aha, he doesn't drink that milk. And the rumor spread like wildfire. Moshe doesn't trust that kashrus. And the owner was surprised. So he went to Moshe, says, is it true Rosh Hashiva doesn't trust my milk? He goes, no such thing. He goes, but I heard by the bris. So he says, what do you mean by the bris? I didn't say anything. And he thought back, and he remembered that he picked up the carton of milk to pour some into his coffee. But it was empty. There was no milk left. So he put it down. You know, when I was growing up, it was a chesed. When you finished the milk, you laid it down on the table or threw it out. You leave it on the table, people pick it up. So 100 eyes saw that he didn't drink that milk, but no one knew the truth. That, besides Moitzi Shemra, is Choshe B'Chsherim. So that's step number one. Before you publicize something, make sure that's the facts, that's the truth. Another precondition, the Chavetz Chaim says, what you're saying has to be a chesaron, not a question of opinion. There are different drachim and avodas Hashem. Because you don't agree doesn't mean that's wrong. A third precondition, says the Chavetz Chaim, you can't exaggerate. You can't add extra words. Saying someone is quiet if he's quiet, okay. If it's true, it's true. Very quiet is a death sentence for the shidduch. Kol amar b'lasap reizem meshubach is a Pesach mitzvah, not when it comes to Shmiras Haloshon. The Chavetz Chaim was once sitting with his Eidim, and they were writing up a nusach, a text, to send a telegram. Remember before our times, telegram was the way, instead of a fax of today. And then, because you paid for every letter, you try to minimize the amount of letters, because every letter costs money. And as they're working, the Chavetz Chaim turned to his Eidim and says, look, what a murdical lesson. We count our letters because we pay for every letter. That's Shmiras Haloshon. We pay for every word of Lashon Hara. Make sure if it is mutter, it has to be justified. So basically, the first part of the word emes, the aleph, means what you're saying has to be emes. The second precondition is the mem, which stands for mazik. And this, the Chavetz Chaim says, you're allowed to say, I'll give you an example. If you see someone damage someone else's item, so of course you got to tell the mazik to pay. If he doesn't want to pay, you're allowed to tell the nizik. But let's say he didn't damage it. Let's say it was a grama b'nizakin. And by you telling the nizik, he's going to make the mazik pay, even though he's potter. So even though what you're saying is true, but if the mazik will get more damage than he deserves, you have no heter to say that information. What's the svara? Because that's not dibur l'tayeles. That's dibur hamazik. You happen to be mazik the other person. But as oichet mensch, you can't cause more damage than what's supposed to happen. And the last part of the preconditions is the saf of emes, which stands for tayeles. And as the Chavetz Chaim says, very often a person passes on information that's true, but it's no longer relevant. I remember someone once asked me, what do you say about so-and-so? I said, what do you ask about shidduchim? He says, where are you holding? Oh, they're engaged already. So what do you want to know? I want to know what I got myself into. There's no heta. That's Lashon Hara. He's not going to act upon the information anyhow. So when the person won't listen anyhow, says the Chavetz Chaim, in these two places, you're not allowed to say, even though it's the truth. Also, the ikka is to accomplish a tayeles. Try to go straight to the person. For example, you see a worker that's coming late. And it is your business because Kaisar Ravens Elazar. So really, you're allowed to go to the boss and tell him this worker's coming late. But says the Chavetz Chaim, first go to the worker himself and say, it's not my business, but it really is. You have to be on time. If you don't, start coming on time, I must tell the boss. If you could accomplish the same without saying Lashon Hara, that's the right course of action. And the Chavetz Chaim in two places, we'll soon see more details in Ches Chafei and Shmiras Haloshon Chelik Beis, Paras Vayeshev, says that was the taina on Yosef. Yosef meant L'Shem Shemayim when he told the father about the Shvatim's wrongdoings. But he should have first went to the Shvatim directly. Why did he go to the father? So even though it was a Te'eles, but he could have avoided the Lashon Hara. Another precondition the Chavetz Chaim spells out is if Lamaisa you could achieve that Te'eles without saying Lashon Hara. For example, someone asks you about a certain family for a shidduch, and there are many chesronis. So you have two options. You could say, you want to hear about that family? Give me 3 hours, sit down, I'll tell you all the details. Or you could say, I know you, I know them, stay away. It's not a good shidduch. So in both responses, you stop the shidduch. But the second one is the right one, because you just stop the shidduch without saying any information. I mean, you have to give some type of clue that this is not the right person. But if you could stop the shidduch or stop the hiring without saying details, that's the chiyuv. But what's the most challenging, and I quote, which is really a big part of today's sugya, Zok the Chavetz Chaim, since the heta is l'toyeles, the person that's giving the negative information has to be mechaven l'shem toyeles. And Dr. Chavetz Chaim, because if you're mechaven l'shem getting even, then there's no heta. And the Chavetz Chaim brings a mavel dikaraya. This is in Lashon Hara Klal Yud, Ber Maim Chaim Sif Katan Yud. He says, we know the Goyim will be punished for giving us all the Agbas Nefesh and Golus. They had to do it. That was part of the Golus. But they didn't do it l'shem Shemayim. And they're punished for the same action because the Kavanah was lacking. So Rabbi said, before we apply this Lamaisa, we have to realize the following. The starting point is Lashon Hara is an Ovain Chama Ma'oid Ma'oid. And as the Chavetz Chaim writes, that Lashon Hara is a Cheskes Issa. Before you say something to Ellis, make sure you have a heta. I always give this mashal. Imagine someone tells you, the local McDonald's, I think it's under a good hashgacha now. Now, would you eat there? I mean, you think, but I know it's treif. If I hear from Rabbanim, but move hakim, I would consider. But, no one eats at McDonald's because someone thinks it's a hechsha. Well, let me tell you, without a doubt, Lashon Hara is many, many times worse than eating at McDonald's. McDonald's is 1 lav, and this is 17 lav and 14 essen. So the starting point is that there's a cheskes issa. Also, the Chavetz Chaim points out in a different place, in Ches Aleph, that when a person means l'shem shemayim, but if he's wrong, so if he's wrong, he's wrong. And his biggest raya from Miriam Hanaviyah, look at the Rambam, the end of Tumas Saras, Miriam Hanaviyah spoke l'shem shemayim about her brother, who she raised, and she was ma'aseh nefesh for. But the ma'aseh was wrong is wrong. And the Rambam says a very sharp lashon. Kal v'choymel b'nei adam ha'rishoyim ha'tipshim she'marbim l'daber gedolos v'neflois. Rather than attach that, but in other words, even if someone means, l'shem shemayim, but, ignorance is not bliss. It's not an excuse. So what do you do if you have a shayla? Like every other shayla we ask, that's Torah. But the basic starting point is that Lamaisa, there's a Cheskes Issa, and there's a Heta, which is a mitzvah of Leisamer Adam Reyecha, when it does qualify to be Lashon Hara L'Toyeles. Now Lamaisa, you'll ask, Ma'yasa ben v'lo yechta. So the answer is, I'm going to learn today, when you apply the basic Yesodis, it's pretty clear what to do. But I will say one thing before I begin, and that is, to me, this is a wonderful vote of confidence in Borei Olam. Because don't forget, in the same pasuk of Leiselech Rachel Ba'amecha, the Bernstein required us, Leisamer Adam Reyecha, to talk Lashon Hara Toyeles. Now, whenever there's a chiyuv, there's also a chiyus. A mechayev is also a mechayev. If the Bernstein gave us the chiyuv to talk Lashon Hara Toyeles, that means we could do it. So we shouldn't be worried. We have to be cautious, but let's walk the tightrope, so to speak, and we'll discuss many, many shaylas. So let's start with the shayla that today we hear very often. Baruch Hashem, there are many yeshivas, there's a many big choice of yeshivas, choice of camps, and someone asks information, what do you say about a certain yeshiva? So, whether one boy is asking another, or parents are asking another parent, so obviously this is a good candidate for Lashon Hara L'Toyeles. I have to know where to send my child, what's appropriate for my child. So when a person wants to answer that question, and he knows it's being used L'Toyeles, you think about the preconditions. Don't focus on something that's a question of opinion, learning fast, learning slow. Is derech halimud, that's not something that's right or wrong. But certain information that is true, whatever you think is, and as facts, you're allowed to give over to the other person. Now I want to make a point, I think there's somewhat of misunderstanding. Recently I was asked a few questions, I gave answers to questions and it was publicized. One of the questions was, someone asked you about camp food. Are you allowed to say that it's greasy, oily, or not so good? So I said, if you know that's the fact, you're allowed to. So someone was very surprised. Why are you allowed to talk bad about camp food? So I guess they missed the point. If someone asks you about a yeshiva, you don't tell them that the food is no good. That wasn't the question. But if someone's asking a specific question about food, obviously the child that maybe has a sensitive stomach, whatever it is, but he won't be able to eat food that's less than perfect. So you could say, listen, it's a great camp, and the food is a tzarachi. Or you could say, listen, it's a hard question to answer. It's a very good camp. Again, the food is lacking somewhat. But if a person's asked point blank and he says, I can't say it's no good, I'm going to say it's good, that's sheker. There's a difference what one has to volunteer. A chasar and otzim, you have to volunteer, but this is not a chasar and otzim. But if asked point blank, then you give over the information and don't feel bad. That's really what the Ratzon Hashem is, as long as you know that's the fact. Someone asked me another tricky question. What's the halach of a suffix toyeles? Now, I don't mean you don't know the facts, because that's no heter. That's part of emes, you have to know the facts. This is the question he gave. There was someone that was sliding in Avodas Hashem. He wanted to tell a certain person that might get involved and might not. In other words, it's emes and Hashem Shemayim, but the person might not get involved. Are you allowed to do something that might yield toyeles and might not? So if you look at the Chafetz Chaim's Lashon in Klal Yud Sif Yud Gimel, 3 times he uses a Lashon of maybe. He says it's a heta, it may be tuchal lavi toyeles, ulai al yedei zeh, efshe sheyemnu mizeh. In one Sif, 3 times he uses a Lashon of maybe. And as Rabbi Yakov Zev once told me, you're allowed to be medayik in the Lashon of Chafetz Chaim because of the Gewalt Gesiyata D'Shmaya that he had. No one knows for sure. You try, a mensch darf ton, nicht oif ton. It's out of our hands, oif's ton. So if you chose the right person that you think might get involved, so that's the tegelis. Your kavana is Dibur Hamatzel. I'll give you an example. Someone in shul suddenly has chest pain. So of course you call Hatzalah, you rush to the hospital. Now, sometimes it happens, it's indigestion. But if you don't know, Safek B'Kuach Nefesh is mutam. Now what happens if the person was okay? So you feel bad, Lafreya? You did the right thing. Safek Tayel is like a Safek B'Kuach Nefesh. I'll give you a few examples. This in Karel, he has a part of his safe is on Shmiras Haloshon. So he has a shaila there about someone looked into a shidduch and he realized there's certain problems. And his wife wants to know, tell me, what's the problems? He says, it's not negeya. I'm telling you, it's not for us. So if the wife persists, and sometimes she might have a better look at it and a better opinion, and more importantly, if she says something, he'll listen to her, he's allowed to share with her. Even though there's a chance that it's beyond hope, but if there's a chance that by her listening, she might have a different way of looking at it, you're allowed to share that information. If it's beyond hope, then in a chanami, one shouldn't share it even with his own wife, because it's no longer negeya. Another shaila, which is much more negeya, a Rebbe asked Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky this shaila. He has a PTA, and parents come, and there's some chesronos that he's certain the parents don't know about. Should he tell the parents? Because basically, he's struggling to get a handle on it, but the parents probably can't change it. Could he tell the parents, or maybe, there's no het? Now, the truth is, the shail was an Erlich Hayid, because the Chafetz Chaim writes beforish, a father asks someone, how's my boychik doing? His boychik is 40 years old and happily married. He wants to know how his son's doing. If the father won't be able to do anything with the information, says the Chafetz Chaim, in Klal Dalid, Sif Yud Aleph, then there's no have to give the father information. There's no easy pass, I'm a parent, I can know Lashon Hara. But Reb Chaim Kanievsky responded, a parent at least has a suffix they could do something. Parents have to know where the child is holding. Now, could be taka the parents can't do anything, but a parent has the ability sometimes to do things. And I would add, and I taka found one of the Heintige Poskim say this, just telling a parent, so the parent could daven for the child's, hatzlacha, that's also a tzarech. The parent knows there's a problem, even though they can't do much, but they could daven for the child. So that's something of a suffix tayelis. Or another common example. There was a shidduch meeting and the boy says no. The shadchan says, why do you say no? So in the Erlich Habach, he says, it's not negeya. I'm saying no because it's not for me. So does a shadchan have a right to persist? I want to know why. So here again, if the shadchan feel that there's hope for the shidduch, if they know why, they could somehow straighten it out, then suffix tayelis is mutter. If it's a chasar and otzma, the boy will not consider proceeding, then in a chanami, there's no heta. In other words, there's no parent easy pass, and there's no shatchin or shiduchim easy pass. If there's a potential toyelas, suffix is mutter. But if it's beyond hope, then in a chanami, he doesn't have to say why, he's saying no. Another important question, someone asks you, tell me about the other person. So the Chavetz Chaim in Klal Dalet Sif Yud Aleph, that basically says, you're not allowed to answer that question. Why does he have to know about that person? If he says, it's negayah for me for a shidduch, for a hiring, I'm taking a tenant, I have to know, whatever it may be. If the person says it's for tayeles, then you're allowed to tell him. But stam the question, tell me about the person, says the Chavetz Chaim, you're not allowed to answer. By answering that statement is Lashon Hara and Lefnei Iva, because you're passing on information without a tayeles. So the Chavetz Chaim says when someone asks for information, and the Chavetz Chaim writes strongly, a person should inquire about a shidduch, about a chavrusa, about a tenant, about a boss, about a worker. You're allowed to, you're mechuyev to. You don't want to get into trouble, but you have to preface your words. It's negayah for me, it's a tayeles, I have to know about that person. The Chavetz Chaim says, and you see how we learned the sugi gesund, he says, if I ask you for information, I know it's for tayeles, so who cares if he knows? L'mais, it's a tayeles. So the Chavetz Chaim says that's Lifnei Iva, because the person that's saying the information doesn't know it's tayeles, and he quotes the Gemara in Nazir, Dav Chav Gimel Niskavan Lechel Basa Chazir V'Ola B'Yadei Basa Tleh. He thought he's doing an issa, so it's a gelungen, and he did a heta. Doesn't make a chilik. So the Chavetz Chaim says that therefore it's Lashon Hara and it's Tayel and it's Lefnei Iva. But then he says even more stark. He says in this case it's not Niskavan Lechel kosher. It's not that he ate kosher. Since the yisoid of the heta is tayeles, and the person that was saying it did not know what tayeles, it's niskavel lechel basa chazir v'ochel basa chazir. You brought a tayeles, but the only heta of tayeles when you know and you mechavel a tayeles. So again, he learned up the sugya based on Shas, Gemara Kedusha, Gemara Nazir. The Chavetz Chaim adds, and again he was very perceptive. He says, but sometimes a person, when he knows it's for information, he doesn't like to talk. Some people, they don't like to talk Lashon Hara only in shul during davening. Then they like it. But stam about information, they don't want to get involved. So Chavetz Chaim says, well, that's not a heta. Because he doesn't want to talk, means you're not allowed to do an issa. But then he says, I'll give you an eitzah. He says, go with him and say, Achie, my brother, I need information. And don't worry, it's not going to go beyond me. People are afraid to come back to haunt them when they give information. And they're right. Because people say, oh, he told me that you're a so-and-so. So he says, you guarantee the person that you're asking, it's not going to go beyond me, it's important, and you're getting a mitzvah. That's the formula that you'll get results. People are afraid that they're going to be betrayed. But if you tell them, I won't betray you, I won't let it go beyond, then you'll get the reinsurance that he wants, and then you'll be able to get the information. Next question. A person wants to know, asks you information. Can you assume that it's for tayeles? So that's pashit. When something's efshel levarer, you can't rely on a chazaka. Why don't you say in a nice way, I hope this is for tayeles? If he says yes, you could trust him. Now, if an Adam Gadol asks you information, you could assume that's Tambal Tayeles. I saw Rav Sternbuch in Chelik Hey, Shin Sadiches writes the Beis Yisrael. The Rebbe once asked him information, and he saw, right, I was hesitant, so the Beis Yisrael says, don't worry, by me there's no Lashon Hara. Whatever I find out about, I take immediate action. Kayadua. So, Astam and Adam Gadol asks information, you have a right to assume it's for Tayeles. But a regular person, you could say in a nice way, I hope it's for tayeles, and watch his reaction. Next question is Negeya Bachim and Yeshiva, Balbatim, it's Negeya to all of people in all situations. You see a friend that's sliding and slipping in Avodas Hashem, and the question is, can you go to his Rav, Rosh Hashiva, the Chavis Mashkiach, and tell him, Pliny needs a little of your tikkun, of a Yeshua. So the Chavetz Chaim in Klal Dalet Sif Yud, he says, Avada, that's a case of tayeles. Because this is not diba hamazg, it's diba hamatzel. And avadi allowed to give over information to whoever's negeya. Now, of course, in this situation, first go to the person and tell him, I noticed you seem to be struggling, can I help you? But as we'll soon see, if it won't work, you'll have to go straight to one of his authority figures. The Chavetz Chaim Lashon is B'noyai Talmidai, but Ibayis Ein B'kroi, Ibayis Ein B'svar is lav dafka someone's own child or Talmud. Because the Chavetz Chaim himself writes Chaveri at one point, and also Ibayis Ein B'svara. This is not Lashon Har Hamazik. This is Dibur Hamatzel. The Chavetz Chaim adds, when you see someone that's hanging around, maybe it could be your own son, has a bad friend or a bad influence, so the Chavetz Chaim and Klal Dalet Sif Yud tell the boy that stay away from that other boy. He's a bad influence. But the Chavetz Chaim adds, and this is important, imagine someone who's supposed to be an Erlich Yid, and he tells his child, stay away from that boy, he's a bad boy. And the boy will be surprised. My father's talking Lashon Har. Because in his childish mind, that's Lashon Har. So the father has to have the foresight and say, mein Kind, we don't talk bad about someone else. But in this case, because the boy might be a bad influence on you, this is a serious problem that it's not Lashon Har. You could even explain to him, Leisamer Adam Reyecha. But if you do tell a child or a Talmud, stay away from that boy, he's a bad boy, you have to explain why you're telling him that it shouldn't be inconsistency on your part. Now the Chavetz Chaim adds a few words that are very surprising. In this very case where you have to tell the child, stay away from a different child, Efsha de Mutter legadel, you're allowed to be megadel the problem. Now people wonder, what does that mean? You're allowed to lie? The answer, no, you're not allowed to lie. Legadel does not mean allowed to lie. It doesn't say Efsha de Mutter l'shaker. Legadel means amplify, emphasize the potential problem. If it won't work by just talking in a regular way, and you know that this is a potential problem that could bring a lot of damage, Efsha de Mutter legadel. The Chavetz Chaim himself writes one of the conditions you're not allowed to exaggerate. But if there's no alternative, and the truth is he says this in Hilchas Rechilas, the end, Siyurim Yud Aleph, if you know someone has a bias of pritzis or apikursis, you have to notify people and it has to be done immediately, even if some conditions are not met. So again, a person has to be honest with himself, but if you feel by saying the facts as it is, the child will continue to associate with that bad boy, we have to realize what the Rambam in the beginning of Hilchas Perek Vav Hilchas Day says, how a person is so influenced by his surroundings. A good friend could lift a person, a bad friend could destroy a person. So a bad friend is considered a mazik, and whether it's a friend of a boy, a friend of a balabas, someone that he had a new friend, you have to tell that person, whether it's a bach or a balabas, this is a very dangerous friend to have. Also, this might explain a Gemara. Now, Daf Yomi Eden will have this sooner or later. Otherwise, it's a Pli Atzuma. The Gemara in Yevamas Daf Samach Gimel says, Rabbi Yehuda told his son Rabbi Yitzchak, Pshad in the Pasuk in Keheles, Moitzini Mar Mimaves Es Ha'isha. What's worse than death is a bad wife. So his son said, Kagoyin man, who are you talking about? So you know what he said? Kagoyin Imcha, your mother. Now you learn that Gemara, you look again. But Rabbi Yehuda told Rabbi Yitzchak that your mother is worse than death. So the Chavetz Chaim and Aleph Yud Gimel and Ber Ma'im Chaim has one pshad. But I want to say a pshad. I'm adding a little bit of pshad I once saw. But I think it's very meduyik in the Lashon HaGemara. It's Yedua, a person's biggest influence is his own parents. And I once pointed out the halachas of Kvoid, Kibbut Aveim are similar to Kvoid Rabbi Muvik. Because ultimately, parents are one's Rabbi Muvik. Now, whatever the reason is, the Marshal knows the reasons. Rabbi Yehuda had a wife that was worse than death. Rabbi Yitzchak was being influenced by this woman. Now, Rabbi Yehuda had a problem. Rabbi Yitzchak must have been an Eidla, Ben Torah, and whatever Mamre does is good, and maybe Taki didn't realize the danger of his own mother. So he made this statement, who's worse than death? And Rabbi Yitzchak was clueless. He goes, I have no idea. So he realized that this is sakana. His mother's a sakana to the child. Kigoyin imcha, you should know. Don't accept what she says. So again, a very dramatic mashal. Don't go home and say you learned this story in the shir today. It's not good for me. But that's really what the Gemara says. But the point is that a bad influence is dangerous. And sometimes kigoyin imcha, even that is necessary. Another question someone asked me, he read a certain article in a newspaper and he felt it as wrong hashkafas, could he publicize it? So first of all, I told him, is it wrong hashkafas or hashkafas that are different opinions? But if this wrong hashkafas, avada, then wrong hashkafas are dangerous. The printed word has a very big impact on a person's outlook. Sometimes you find that Chuvas, Poiskim, right, about another Poiskim, you can't rely on his psak. So if there is something wrong with an article, and if it's absolutely wrong, not subjectively wrong, but objectively wrong, then Enechanami, you're allowed to do whatever is necessary to prevent future hezek. Someone asks you, what do you say about my bargain? He bought something. And, he could have got the same bargain in a different store and less of a cost. So even though you're saying the truth and it's tayeles, but it's not really tayeles. Because once the deal was made, it's not a mekach tois, it wasn't the aino. He could have got a better price. But that's something that you don't gain from telling the person, so there's no tayeles. It might be emes, you might mean the kavana, tayeles, but there is no tayeles. Someone wants to ask me, can I complain about the quality or the service of a certain store? So is it because of a personal problem that you had? So maybe it's not really a problem, maybe it's your own bias. But besides that, again, if there's a foreseeable tayeles, it's mutter. Stam to complain. If there's no tayeles, the other person doesn't shop in that store, there's no heter. I'll give you another example. This is a mitzvah lefarsim. Someone calls you for information, whether it's shidduch, whether it's hiring a worker, and you went through the whole checklist. Whatever you're saying is MS, Aleph, Mem, Suf. The problem is, where are you giving over that information? You're saying it in your house, and your children or your wife are listening. You're saying that this is not a good worker, don't hire that person. He's not honest. So everything is good except other people are hearing information that they don't have to know about. So for the family or a co-worker that's listening to you talk about someone else, for them it's not tayeles. So a person has to know when to say the lashon hara tayeles. Sometimes that is a problem of a lack of tayeles. A very important question. A child comes home from yeshiva and he's ranting and raving. He's upset about a rebbe, upset about a talmud, another talmud. How should a parent react? So avada and avada and avada. We can't overemphasize the importance of chinuch habonim regarding Shmiras Haloshon. The Chavetz Chaim writes in Mishnah Berurah, Shin Mem Gimel Sit Katan Beis Bekitzer, but in the end of Klal Tes and the Hagah, a little more barichas. The reason why we have so many problems in Shmiras Haloshon because there's not enough chinuch about lashon hara. A child sits down to the table and he doesn't wash the Tils Yadayim. So they say, go wash. What do you mean? I'm not letting you eat without washing. But a child sits down by the table and starts talking lashon hara. What do you have to say? Or even adults talk lashon hara. The zero tolerance attitude is lacking when it comes to Shmiras Haloshon. So alavai, Dr. Chavetz Chaim, would have more emphasis and more chinuch on Shmiras Haloshon. But what's equally important, if not more important, a child has to share his problems with a parent. A child has to have an open line of communication with parents. Imagine a child, the first time he complains about something, no, tell me it's lashon hara. What happens if he runs into a serious problem? We live in a world that we don't know what's going on. And about Dal Ramas in yeshiva, we have problems sometimes that, shlei sarma v'yiseinu. A child that has a problem has to be able to have someone to talk to. You can't close the communication between parent and child. So what you do is you say, you have a problem, tell me it. And if it's a problem, of course, you have to do what you have to do. And if it's not, say, mein Kind, I listened because I was afraid it's a problem. This is not a problem. In the future, tell me things that you think are real problems. This, I think you should have realized, is not really a problem. Try to give the sensitivity, but you can't, discourage the child from sharing his feelings. And this in Karelitz, in Teves Chut Hashani, in Perek Daled, Sif Cotton Bays, says, Mamish, this Yisoid. And he says, but again, it's an opportunity when the child wasn't justified to give him a chinuch. And he says the story heard from his mother. His mother was the sister of the Heilige Chazon Ish. His mother once heard, when she was a child, someone bad-mouthing her father, who was the Rav of the city. So she came home and she told the father, someone said bad about you. So the father said, Rechilus! And with such a passion that Kol Yameha, she has that feeling, that sensitivity. Don't forget, someone said about her father. So he should have, taken it seriously. But he said, Rechilus! So, you have to juggle the two truths. The child has to be told, given the chinuch about Shmiras Haloshon, but a child has to know that parents are there for him. If there's a problem, he has to know who he has someone to share it with. Now, of course, when a child's talking about his Rebbe or Manayel, he has to speak with Derech Eretz. You have a problem, it's one thing. You could tell me your problem, but when the child's talking with disrespect, then you have to say, no, we don't talk that way. You have a problem, talk like you're allowed to talk, and then we'll listen. So this way a person gets all of chinuch necessary. Hopefully he will come to what he's really looking for, to give the child the right protection and the right chinuch. Now, Agav, it's l'chayr pashit at Lashon Hara and Akot is taka asa, even though the Chafetz Chaim in Ches Gimel says if it doesn't damage the child, there is no issa. That's true. If the Lashon Hara doesn't damage the child, there's no issa Lashon Hara. But more often than not, saying bad about a fellow Talmud, another child, there's no heta, because generally it's either bad for the child, his reputation, or for the parents, or both. So when the child says about a friend of his who's a cut, that itself is not a heta to listen to Lashon Hara. As I said earlier, when someone is sliding, whether it's a bach in yeshiva or a fellow balabas, if you can't tell him straight, directly, you're allowed to go to someone that could help him. And it's interesting, the Chafetz Chaim says that was the Tainan Yosef, that he didn't go straight to the brothers. The Afikei Yam in the Akdama Techelik Beis, interesting, he has one shtickle, Bina B'Mikra, beautiful shtickle. He says, Yosef's tremendous zehiris in Shmiras Haloshon is inspiring. He says, and he says, I'll prove it. It's interesting, he says, Yosef, when he went to his father's, Vayave Yosef as the Bas Samrei al Aviyim. Very funny Lashon Vayave, like as if he delivered it. What Lashon Vayave? And why al Aviyim? It was his father. Zokt Afikayam, Yosef kept all Hilchos Shmiras Haloshon. And Yosef knew that he can't go straight to the brothers, because they looked at him like, it's B'nai Bila, B'nai Zilpa. He's one of those, subhumans. They won't even be geiris him. So he felt if he can't go to them, he had to go to the father. But he didn't do it else. Anything but L'Shem Shemayim. Vayave Yosef el Avihem, their father. Because he could do something for them, but not because of his own personal interests. So is that a steer to the Chafetz Chaim's shot? No, both are true. If you could go to the person straight, go to the person straight. If not, go to authority. I think it's two pshatim in Yosef, but both are true. Another sticky question, could happen in a yeshiva, could happen in a Shabbos table. A child, a little child, it could be a big child, acts inappropriately in class or by a Shabbos table. He says something disrespectful or says something that's not proper hashkafa. And a Rebbe once asked me, how should he respond? Should he say something barabim? So he's embarrassing the child. Of course, but the next word, what should the Rebbe do? So this is a tricky question, but I want to tell you, I once asked Rabbi Yakov Kamenetsky a similar question, and the answer he told me, I found Rav Vosna in Chelik Yud, Kuf Samach Beis, come out to the same thing. Avada, when you could give Musa, but sinner, you're mechuyev to. But here's another problem. The child, by acting disrespectful, challenged and threatened the authority of the Rebbe. If the Rebbe lets it go on, then that will happen again, because people see the Rebbe is a pushover. If the child says something that's wrong in Ashkafa, and the Rebbe just lets it go by, he probably agrees to it. So now, this innocent child is a right of the entire class. So the Rebbe or the parent that saw this outburst has to regain either his control or the prop hashkafa. And Rabbi Yankov told me then that the Rebbe has to react publicly. And Rav Wosner has the same psak. Somebody asked about in a girls' school. So, he says, if someone says something wrong, you have to react. Now, of course, the Rebbe has to keep in mind that it might be surprising for the Talmidim to hear the Rebbe berating a Talmud in front of them. So the Rebbe could explain. He said something that's wrong. I would really tell him something privately, but you heard something that was wrong, and I must tell you it's wrong. Or chutzpah is not tolerated. I would tell him privately, but you should know this is unacceptable. It's probably a good idea for the Rebbe afterwards to approach the Talmud and try to explain to him why it was necessary. But at the end of the day, when this child is a threat to the authority of the Rebbe or to a parent, you have to make sure that Reidif is not continuing to work, Rahman al-Litzlan. So whatever is necessary, you have to do to regain control of the classroom or, of course, of the Shabbos table. Another question. A sticky question, but it has to be mentioned. Someone asked me that a friend of his was reading from books from a Torah personality who had questionable hashkafas. So the truth is that even a little bit krum hashkafa is very dangerous. So if you're allowed to tell someone that this friend is no good or this work is no good, you're allowed to tell someone that this das Torah is no good. And I think it'll be suffice. I'll read you what the Chazon Ish wrote. It's a mavaldik letter in Igeres Chelik Beis Kuf Lamed Gimel. It doesn't say what the story was, but it seemed the Chazon Ish came out about someone who was a Torah personality. He says, but I had no menucha because maybe it was lashon hara. Even though you're allowed to say on uman boom nasai, kolshkein, you're allowed to say on someone who's a bad hashkafa. Because people have to know who's a true God and who's not. But you have to have Zehiras Yisera, because even a Kutzai Shel Yud is the difference between a mitzvah of saying or an issa of Mevazah Talmidei Chachamim. So the Chazon Ish put the challenge very bluntly. A person that's talking about a Talmud Chacham is walking a tightrope. It might be a mitzvah to say this, or it might be B'zayin Talmud Chacham. So, like everything else, Habolatay and Messiah, you have to be careful. But there's no doubt about it, someone who is not a Bar Samcha, and people are following him, that's Lashon Hara L'Tayeles. In fact, in the Ma'aseh Ish, Chelik Gimel, Reish Aleph, the Chazon Ish said about a certain Paisik, you're not allowed to follow his Psak. And then he added, you'll say I'm saying Lashon Hara? He said, no, if you say that this shoemaker is not reliable, it's a mitzvah, certainly saying about a certain Paisik is not reliable is not Lashon Hara. Of course, you have to be a Chazon Ish to say that, but basically, this is the tightrope. But again, if the Kavanah is genuine and the facts are known, this would be okay. But I want to say, in Dayalach Kim Beramiza, I hear more than once, maybe more in the yeshiva, people talking about Gedolim. I say, why are you talking? No, because that God will say you're allowed to talk about that God. I said, 30 years ago, that was Nageya. Today, it's no longer relevant. So, it's a mitzvah we can't change. But a mitzvah to talk bad when it's a bad influence, and today is no longer a bad influence, there's no head to the talk. And I found in the Derech Sich at the end of Chelik Beis, on the Tov Pei Gimel, Rab Chaim Kanievsky says he once told his father, the Stipler, what the Chazon Ish said about a certain person. A Gadol God. So the Stipler said, Lashon Hara. So he said, but the Chazon Ish said it. So when the Chazon Ish said it, it was Teyeles, and now it's not a Teyeles. So in other words, it's not like Zoysa Tayloitu Mechlefes, it remains a mitzvah of Dairei Dairis. Whenever it's Negeya. But then I found the real Mitzvah, and it's a mavaldik part of history Bechlal. Rabbi Yashiv and Chelik Gimel in the Tshuvas Simon Chof Tes wrote to someone that printed the history of the Frankfurter Kehillah. And part of it was when he wrote about the famous Kliva get. Now those who are familiar, there was a get that was given, very controversial, Gedolei Yisrael on both ends. So Bayasha says, why did you print what Gedolim said about other Gedolim if it's no longer Negeya? You did it? Okay, it's too late, but you should know it was wrong. Now, Rabbi Asher printed it. I don't know if he didn't print his chuvas, but he gave it to them to print, because that's an halacha. Something is printed is wrong. You wrote there that one God have another one. He said, that God, look, if today they would have a Sanhedrin, he would sit on the Sanhedrin. So b'shaitai, you say what you have to say, but today it's plain lashon hara. So what has to be said has to be said, but it has to be a te'eles that is still neigeya for today. Rav Sternbach, Shin Sadik Ches, has a story, and again, these things people have to have this, at least in the back of their mind. Someone told the Manal that a certain Rebbe was doing improper things, and the Manal ignored it because he wouldn't accept lashon hara. And it turned out to be never the truth. So Rav Sternbach wrote to this Manal, you were oiva, alei adam riyecha. A suffix of something serious, look into it. I'm not saying you fire a person, but Gedaliah ben Achika was faulted that he wasn't mekabel lashon hara when he was supposed to be. The point is, it's a mitzvah sometimes to listen. And l'idar gisa, you'll say, but I'm confused. Should I talk? Should I not talk? So I'll tell you what Rabbi Yankov once asked when I asked him a question. I also said something like, what do you do? What's the klal? So he goes, the größte klal is zu wissen, als nicht doch kein klal. The real klal is no klal. How do you give a klal? Something that could either be an issacham of lashon hara or a mitzvah samad amar. But if you follow the Chavetz Chaim's preconditions, and if you're not sure, ask a shaila. Habolataya Messiah. The next big question is where I began with, and that is the concept. Someone asked me, he wants to ask the ex-chosin, right? Kala, whatever is about the one that they broke off from. So this is very, very problematic, if not mamashas. Let me explain. Because the Chavetz Chaim Rechilas Tes Beis Ois Gimel, and the Chavetz Chaim Lashon Hara Yud Ois Beis says that part of Te'elis is that the person that's giving information has to be mechavan l'shem Te'elis. Now, what that means is, and I'll explain, because the starting point is that this is lashon hara, this is negative talk. But if you're mechavan l'Te'elis, you're turning it from diba hamazik to diba hamatzah. But if the person that's giving it over is doing it l'shem mazik, so it remains a regular lashon hara. And the Chavetz Chaim in Klal Daled Yud Aleph in the Agah says, therefore, don't ask information from someone soina, because that person cannot give over information l'Te'elis. Now, the Chavetz Chaim cautions, so if someone asks you, and if you're not a soina, don't say, well, I don't want to get into trouble. I might mean work on yourself and give over l'shem shamayim, because then you have a mitzvah of le'samar adam riech, or better yet, you have no heta to shirk your responsibility because you have to stand up and help another person. So he's not discouraging him information. He's saying, if you know that you are saying because of your bias, then you're not allowed to say. Now, this is human emotion. It's not a person's bad, but this is a person's it's a human being. A person has his own feelings, and it's very hard for him to see things beyond his bias. And the Chavetz Chaim says very clearly that if someone has grievance about someone else, and decides he wants to publicize it, so people should know how bad the other person is. Says the Chavetz Chaim in Klal Yud Sif Yud Aleph that you're not the right person for that job. Because you're saying it because of your own personal pain, not because to help other people. Now, this is something tricky. So I told you now an interesting thing. If you can ask a sign of information, a victim can publicize information, but the rest of us have to give up information. How does that work? Simple. An Erlich Hayid knows how to do mitzvahs, and this is a mitzvah. You have information, you have to do it l'shem shemayim, to give it over for Te'elis. I'll give you a mashal l'sabri as-so'izim. Kanoyim poigim boy is a wonderful thing. Look at the Schar Pinchas Gat. But if it's lacking the Shem Shemayim, it's a regular Ritzicha. That's the identity of Lashon Hara Te'elis. If it's done right, it's a mitzvah of L'Sam Adam Riyecha. If it's done as a personal vendetta, as a vengeance, it's an Avei of Lashon Hara. In other words, every mitzvah you have the Maisa mitzvah, and then the Kavana enhances or gives more meaning. Here there's no Maisa mitzvah. Here it's Lashon Hara. If you make kavana l'te'eles, it's a ma'isa mitzvah. If you have kavana to be mazik, it's lashon hara. With kavana to be mazik, you're left with nothing. The question is, can the Sayyid say, but I am beyond the giyas, I know myself, I could do it. So I want to make a point. I think it's a mitzvah lafarsim because it's negay in many other situations of life. We are human beings, and one of our characteristics is ein adam roya chayv ala atzmai. A person that has certain feelings, he can't go beyond that. The Chofetz Chaim used to say, if I say he's a gewir, no, mechates, he has more money than I, so he's a gewir. Aber Rothschild sagt, das ist a gewir, Rothschild ist a gewir, that's a gewir. The pasuk in the beginning of Shoftim, ki ha-shoichet yarva eni chachamim v'yisaler divrei tzadikim. And now this is not our watered down version of a tzaddik or chacham. This is the Rebbeinu Shlomo's meaning of a tzaddik and a chacham, and in Parashas Mishpatim, the Torah refers to him as a pikeach. So the Rebbeinu Shlomo's tzaddik, chacham, pikeach cannot say he's beyond negiyas. Ki ha-shoichet yarva eni chachamim v'yisaler divrei tzadikim, or kashoichet yava pikchim, as says Mishpatim. This is Rothschild's gewir. A person, like the Gemara says in Ksubis, chad. We always say chad umnigi yosav. Just to give you a little of a feeling, the Ksav Soifa in Yeridei Siman Kuf Tes writes what he heard from his heilige father Chasam Soifa. The Sma, the great Sapaistik, had a din Torah with someone in the city, and the Sma was a tzaddik. No one's going to pass it against the Sma, so he went to a different city for a din Torah. The Sma argued his case, the other person, and the Dayan paskin against the Sma. So the Sma took out the money and told the boy, okay, I'll din, here's the money, go home. Turns to the Dayan and says, let's talk and learning. I don't think you paskin this and this, I think this and this and this is right. So the Dayan says, what should I do? I also agree to you, but they just printed a say for Sma and Chayshe Mishpat. He has this shaila, and he passed him like I said, so you have to pass him like the Sma. So the Ksav Sofer writes that the Sma, Hoyde v'loi boish, ein adam roya choy v'la atzmoi. You're talking about a Sma. He paskined against what he wrote with his own hand in Sma. Is that a chiddush? Not at all. Ki ha-shoichet yav eni chachamim, saldi v'tzadikim. Now why do I say this? Besides the obvious nafkamina that a soina can't say I'm beyond negiyas. But there's so many of the daily sichsuchim, machloikesin, whether it's bein adam l'chaveri, bein ish l'ishtay, between neighbors and business, and you hear two people arguing, and they both are 1,000% convinced they're right. Who's lying? Nobody. Each sees things from their perspective. They don't know there's another tzad. And this is the problem of negiyas. If only people would stop and think, I think I'm right, but there's another person, and ein adam ro'eh choy v'la atzmai. They wouldn't be so convinced that they're right. They wouldn't fight so mightily. But a person thinks I'm being taken for a ride. It's not right. Remember, ki ha-shoichet yav, it's not you're no good. You're a human being. The Chazon Ish in Amunah B'Tachin in Gimel Aleph, it's called an Egeya, when a person has a scuffle in Chayshe Mishpat, he says a person gets so caught up that he confuses the roidif with the nirdif. He cries out, Hoshieni Hashem, when he's the roidif. But his negiyas, he thinks he's the nirdif. So that's why Lamaisa, it's very important when someone has any type of a run-in, realize he's not seeing it from a perspective that he can see it objectively. But what's the geya for us, when someone wants to find information, the ex-spouse or the ex-chassan is not the right source. The Chofetz Chaim brings a murdik raya. You see how we learn Kol Torah Kula with his Shmiras Haloshon. In Chayshe Mishpat Tav Chaf Aleph Sif Yud Gimel, the Mechaber says if you see someone hitting another person, so you have to stop the maker, even if it means hitting the other person. But if you know you're hitting the other person because he's your signer, then you can't hit him. Because you're not hitting Zok the Sma, the Sma on the page. You're not hitting him because to save the nirdaf, you're hitting him to get even with the maker. Zok the Chofetz Chaim. So that means even though you're doing a mitzvah, but if your kavanah is not perfect, don't do it. Zok the Chofetz Chaim, the Taz argues on the Sma and says, what do you mean? You're doing a mitzvah, stop the person hitting the other person. So the Chofetz Chaim is not true. Because here, besides the problem, you're not doing it l'shem teyeles, if you have your own negiyas, you're not even doing the emes. You're not even saying the emes. You don't even see the emes. So therefore, you can't even know who's right, who's wrong. So even the Taz says when someone's hitting someone else, you have to stop him for states. But here, you don't know what the truth is. You're not giving over the right picture. And that's why the Chavetz Chaim in Shmiras Haloshon, Shar Zechira, Perikut Zayin and Hagah, he writes, if someone sees his father's machlokes with someone else, even if he's convinced his father's right, don't defend the father. Better stop the machlokes. Because you think your father's right because ain't of them right. But how do you know that you're really being mechavan to the emes? Better not defend your father. Better put an end to machlokes. Because you can't get involved when you don't see the picture as it is. And that's why it's very hard, if not impossible, to ask information from a Saina. First of all, they're not saying Latiyelas, and also you're not getting a clear picture. Now, the only thing I was thinking to that, what that person asked me, maybe a shtickle of Mamonashach, Efsham. Someone who's ex-chosin, right? So the truth is, it could be there wasn't a terrible sin, it could be it was a problem. So if you wouldn't consider the shidduch, unless you hear exactly what the problem was, so maybe you could go over to the ex-chosin l'mashal and say, tell me the story, but I know you have your own interest, but try to tell me as much as you can realistically. If they say bad information, you're not really losing much because you weren't considered the shidduch anyhow. If they say an explanation of what the problem was that for you is not a chesaron, so then you could take a look into it. If I care, they're helping. But you have to realize that it's generally not a good idea, especially an ex-spouse. It's very, very, very rare to get unbiased information. That's almost impossible. The Chavetz Chaim says you have to go to someone else. I did found in the end of Perik Zayin and Chut Hashani and Hilchot Lashon Hara, someone asked Rabbi Nissen Karel's point blank, if I have no other source of information, can I ask the ex-Desaina? And he said, no, there's no head, it's Lashon Hara. So maybe just again, an chas or kala could be it wasn't a terrible machlokes. Hopefully, maybe you could be saimach on something that you could take which is salvageable. But b'derech klal, a person has to know that when he has certain feelings, he's not seeing the emes. So you're not giving the emes. So what information are you giving? Someone asked me another question, and this is important to mention, that how far do you have to go to avoid saying Lashon Hara? Could I just, let's say it's hard for me to stop a shidduch without saying information. How far do you have to go? So I told him in our Chaim HaKadosh that Mamish literally blew my mind. In Parshas Vayetze, Chav Zayin Mem Vav, we find that Esav is out to kill Yaakov. So Rivka tells Yaakov, run away. And she tells Yitzchak, Katzti b'chaya, I can't have Yaakov getting married. Here, he has to go away. So the Chaim HaKadosh in Mamish 2 lines says, why didn't Rivka at this point expose the fallacy, the farce that's called Esav? Why'd you tell him a story that you send him away because of a shidduch? So Dr. Chaim HaKadosh that she felt there's no heta. Because her only reason to tell Yitzchak the story to save Yaakov, she had a different plan. Let Yaakov run away. So with that, she's Mekayim Esamad Adam Riyacha. But she doesn't have to talk Lashon Hara to Yitzchak because there was like Efsheh B'Oifanacha. Please, in this Gavad, the Zehiris that the Imoyis had to avert Lashon Hara. It's Efsheh B'Oifanacha. It reminds me of what the Chavetz Chaim writes, Gemara, that Mama should be Ner L'Ragleinu. The Klais were fighting the war, this is the beginning of Yeshua with Ai, and they lost 318 nefashis, which wasn't supposed to happen. And Yeshua was distraught, and he said, and he fell on his face. Baruch help. So Baruch said, why are you falling on your face? Chata Yisrael. So Yeshua says, Mi chata, I don't know who did something wrong. He's the right, if I have to get, but I don't know who was v'rong. So the Baruch says, V'chidilta ani? Do you think I'm about Lashon Hara? Leich vatel garolais. Make a goyrel, and you'll figure out who was wrong. Frag the Chavetz Chaim in Klal Yud, to see if you cut your knowledge from Ber Mayim Chaim. Ein lecha te'elas gedolim izu. Ein lecha teharas halev gedolim Yeshua and Bari Olam. This Achan was a Roidif, he was a Rasha, did all the Averis. What does it mean? The Chidilter ani. The Teretz is, if you don't have to talk, even if it means making a goyrel, that's what the Baruch Shalom wants. So that's why Lamaisa, it's important to know, to avoid these type of confrontations. Let me just say one more point. Someone asked me, and it happens all the time, someone asks you, tell me about that person. And it's only negative to say. What do I answer? Because if I say I don't want to talk about him, it's Lavak Lashon Hara. I said, what you should say? Say very proudly, I don't talk about people. I'm part of the Shmiras Haloshon revolution that's going to bring the Geula. You should join. But I'm part of that revolution where I don't talk about people. And hopefully that will bring us to Geula. Amen. Amen.
I'd like to thank Rabbi Yakov Zev for helping us clean our mouth to speak Lashon Tov and Yidden always. Today she would like to thank Yedidi Rabbi Ari Pana Shlita Stark for sponsoring a share for one of the big pioneers of Klal Yisrael that Klal Yisrael lost. Rabbi Avram Wolfson was a big asking for many Moises HaTorah, the Klal and the Prat. So we take in Shmos saying that today the Shia is Pinklich Shmiras Haloshon. That was one of his topics that he really worked hard on. To be Marbets and Klal Yisrael Zentak Nishmas Rabbi Avram Nachman Bar Zev Wolfson. The Mishpacha should be mischazik themselves. Should have a nechama and ganz Klal Yisrael should know only from Yeshuas and Besuras Teves and Simchas Tamid. Ebchamne Kashem Rota Kodesh Baruch Le Zako Yis Yisrael Lefikach Hebelem Torah Mitzvah Shenema Adonai Chofes Man Sitka Yagdil Torah V'Yadeh Kaddish. Amen. Amen. Amen.